Mom, you still park under the oak tree, right? The car's dented on the left side, isn't it? The words shot through the packed courtroom. An 8-year-old black boy with curly hair and unshaken eyes stood tall in the heart of judgment and power. His name was Elijah Rhodes, and he had just pointed directly at the judge holding the gavel. In that moment, time froze. The gavel slipped from Judge Marlene Rhodes's hand and struck the cold marble floor with a chilling crack. The entire courtroom held its breath. No one knew what was more terrifying, that a nameless child had identified the dented car of a complete stranger, or that the stranger was his birth mother, the woman he had been forcibly separated from at just 3 years old. A child who shouldn't remember, wasn't supposed to remember, but memory, blood, had returned, right in the place that was supposed to be about justice. This wasn't a trial anymore. This was a blood call that had waited 5 years to be spoken, and it would unleash a shockwave that would shake the entire American legal system, because Elijah never forgot. Before she became known as the symbol of justice for the state of Louisiana, Marlene Rhodes was once a 27-year-old woman standing at a crossroads of fate, pregnant, unmarried, with no power to protect herself. She was the youngest black attorney ever nominated for the bench. The eyes of the elite were on her, not just because of her brilliance, but because they wanted to watch her fall. And when news broke that she was pregnant out of wedlock, every word of praise turned into a blame. Her family, rooted in high society, and offered a safe solution. You'll be allowed 2 hours with the baby, then NovaCare will take care of the rest. No paperwork, no one will know. Marlene remembered that day like a scar. She sat beside her child in the hospital room. Tiny arms, soft skin, and eyes that didn't yet know how to speak. She sang the lullaby her mother once sang to her, whispering, "If you ever get lost, follow the scent of purple orchids. I'll find you." Then the door opened. 2 men in white shirts stepped in, and her baby disappeared, as if he had never been born. But today, that boy had returned, and he had spoken the name of the mother who once chose her career instead of holding on to him. For 5 years, Elijah Rhodes drifted through 7 different foster centers. No one could keep him. No one could understand him. The boy never cried, never screamed, never threw tantrums. But in his eyes, there was something that made adults uneasy. Elijah didn't cling to anyone, yet he never seemed lost. He blended into every place, as if he'd lived there his whole life, only to suddenly grow silent, observe, and become a mirror reflecting what others tried to hide. He knew exactly when to stand at the words "all rise." He could draw a courtroom layout down to the placement of the water glass, the tissue box, the color of the clerk's dress. Teachers thought he might be autistic, but the psychologist froze after just 1 session. This isn't imagination. This boy is remembering something very real, very specific, and very painful. Elijah didn't speak much, but every move he made seemed to be tracing the outline of something lost. And now, that something was starting to take shape. Before the eyes of the entire nation, when the trial seemed like nothing more than procedure, the boy stood up. No one had called his name. Elijah walked straight to the center of the courtroom, eyes locked on the judge. No tear, no begging. He simply began to speak. "Mom used to eat gumbo at the Riverside Cafe, the one with the old man with silver hair. You wore purple orchid perfume, and you said, 'Wherever you are, follow the scent of orchids. I'll find you.'" The packed courtroom fell into utter silence. No lawyer, no guardian had any idea what was happening. But Marlene Rhodes's eyes began to tremble. She raised her hand to her lips, but couldn't hide her rapid breathing, because what Elijah had just said were things she had buried in her heart for 5 years. The secret of a mother who once whispered to her newborn, in just 2 fleeting hours by a hospital crib. No one believes a 3-year-old could remember things like that. But blood has its own memory. And sometimes, love doesn't need time to leave a mark. Just 1 touch is enough. That night, Marlene Rhodes didn't sleep. The sound of the gavel dropping still echoed in her head like a drill spinning backward through time. How could an 8-year-old boy remember the words she whispered when he was only 3? She didn't call the police. She didn't call her colleagues. Marlene dialed a number she never thought she'd need. Reuben Cross, former federal investigator, suspended for digging too deep. Reuben asked only one question. "If this is personal, what are you willing to lose?" Marlene answered softly, "I don't need the law. I need the truth, even if it kills me." 3 hours later, Reuben called back, his voice dry as bone. "You're not imagining it. Elijah Rhodes has no real birth certificate. The names listed as his adoptive parents, Marcus and Janelle Rhodes, died in 2014, and the adoption file is a flawless forgery. A child built from paper that doesn't exist." And Marlene understood. Elijah hadn't just been taken from her arms. He had been erased from the world. The name NovaCare Foundation had once been praised across headlines, an organization for the children, receiving millions in federal funding to help abandoned kids. Their symbol was an open hand, with the slogan, "Giving hope, building futures." But Reuben knew the truth. Where there's money, there are always things that never make it into the reports. While tracing Elijah's forged records, he uncovered a series of documents, identical letter patterns, matching stamps, repeated for years, tied to over 60 children. Same pattern every time. No original records. Parent names matched with death certificates. ID numbers generated by an isolated system, disconnected from the national database. NovaCare wasn't helping those children. They were reprogramming them. Reuben found an encrypted internal manual, identity reassignment protocol, language relearning, origin denial, keyword repetition, core memory suppression. A place once known as a support foundation, now exposed as a memory recoding facility in disguise. And Elijah was just one of them. How could a child taken from his mother at age 3 still remember every detail? The scent of her perfume, the color of her dress, the words she whispered behind a closed hospital door. Marlene couldn't explain it, but Reuben had a theory, and it was chilling. The boy might have been subjected to a reverse conditioning protocol, where instead of erasing memories, they forced forgotten ones to resurface, to test emotional reactions. According to confidential files from NovaCare, there was a program called the Reactive Bonding Protocol, where children were tested on their ability to recall original emotional bonds, to measure dependency, resistance, and usability. Elijah, instead of being taught to forget, may have been triggered to remember. But he didn't just recall what they wanted him to. He remembered things no one could program, things only a mother could leave behind. And that's what made him different. What made him impossible to control. Reuben couldn't find Elijah's original records, but he did find a child who escaped. Autumn, 10 years old, she was discovered near an abandoned warehouse in Baton Rouge. Malnourished, no memory of her last name, only the word Arcadia. When Reuben and Marlene met with her, the girl didn't speak. She started to draw. Shaky pencil lines revealed a white building, long hallways, camera, a room labeled H29. There was something called the White Light Room. And smaller rooms marked language reset and new family simulation. Then Autumn whispered, as if someone might hear her. They made us write "Mom is dead." If someone cried, they'd be locked in the dark room, where there's no time. She spoke while clinging to a broken rubber bracelet. She said, "This is the last thing my mom gave me." Marlene froze. Elijah wasn't an isolated case. This was a system, a blueprint, a nightmare that had been pre-designed. After Autumn's testimony, Reuben traced geographic data, coded markers, and hand-drawn layout. It all pointed to a location over 30 miles outside New Orleans, the Arcadia Center. From the outside, Arcadia looked like any other juvenile counseling facility. Blue sign, white fences, neatly trimmed trees. But inside was another world. Reuben broke in at night. A steel door opened to a freezing corridor, cameras on every corner, soundproof holding room, steel beds with no mattresses, and on the walls, speakers repeating one command in a monotone voice. "Your name is new. Your past is false. Your life begins here." Reuben planted hidden cameras, streaming live to a private security server. 8 minutes, just 8 minutes. But the outside world saw it all. This wasn't a treatment center. It was a factory for programming human beings. And the most terrifying part was, Elijah may have been there too. 8 minutes of video, no music, no narration, just close-up shots of hollow-eyed children, robotic, repeating commands like machine. They didn't play, they didn't smile. They didn't call each other's names, only spoke in unison, as if programmed to forget who they were. "Your name is new. Your past is false. Your life begins here." Reuben streamed the footage to a private platform, but within 30 minutes, the video had spread everywhere. In just 3 hours, over 4 million views, thousands of comments flooded in like a storm. This is a child reprogramming camp in disguise. FBI needs to step in now. I'm a mother. I can't imagine my child being put in a place like this. If a child can remember his mother after 5 years, we don't have the right to forget them just because the government finds it convenient to close the file. The hashtag #RememberTheChildren hit #1 on Twitter overnight. All across America, people began to wake up because for the first time, they had seen hell operating under the mask of compassion. 2 days after the historic trial, where Elijah had looked a judge in the eye and called her mom, shaking the heart of a nation, the boy vanished. On the way from court to a temporary shelter, the SUV escort was stopped on a deserted stretch of road. The driver was found unconscious behind the wheel. Pulse weak, eyes twitching. Signs of a low-dose sedative. And Elijah? Not a single trace. Only a crumpled piece of paper left on the back seat, handwritten in red ink. Touch NovaCare, lose your child forever. $5 million or silence forever. No signature, no fingerprints, just a single strand of white hair and a dash cam camera that had been shut off exactly 18 minutes before. Marlene held the note, her fingers trembling. There was no more time for legal procedure, no room left for trust. This wasn't just about money. They wanted to silence a mother. With the very child she had already lost one. And Marlene knew, this time, if she stayed silent, there would be no third chance. For the first time in 5 years, Marlene Rhodes was no longer a judge. No longer the flawless symbol of justice. She was just a mother, sitting helpless at an empty desk, clutching a threat letter stained with blood-red ink. Elijah had been taken. Once again, she had lost her child, but this time, it happened right after he found his way back. She collapsed onto her desk, her body trembling with silent sobs. No more tears for the media. No more logic for the rules. She spoke, her voice scraped from the pit of her soul. I lost him once. This time, no one, no system, no monster gets to touch my child again. Reuben stood beside her in silence. He knew, in this moment of collapse, a new war had been born. It was no longer Marlene, the face of the law. It was Marlene, the mother, ready to burn the entire system to the ground, to bring her blood back home. That night, inside a decaying abandoned house on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, Elijah lay curled up between 4 mold-stained walls. No lights, no voices, just the steady breathing of the man guarding him. An 8-year-old boy, seemingly helpless, began to calculate when one of the 2 guards fell asleep. Elijah quietly crawled across the creaking wooden floor, hands trembling, but eyes unblinking. He slipped a phone from the man's jacket pocket, opened the GPS, switched on the camera, snapped a photo of a peeling wall with a message scrawled in black charcoal, Mark H. 29. Then he opened contacts, scrolled to a number he had glimpsed during the trial, his mother's phone number. The message went out in silent, no word, just a single photo, and GPS coordinates fired off like a distress flare from the pit of hell. And on the other end, Marlene received the image in the dead of night. Her hands shook, then clenched into fists. Her son was still fighting. 3 a.m. Rain poured like a flood over the abandoned industrial zone on the outskirts of Baton Rouge. Using the coordinates Elijah had sent, Reuben tracked down a 2-story concrete house, rusty steel doors chained shut, no signs, no name. At 3:42 a.m., the FBI launched the raid. Boots thundered across steel floor. Shouts pierced the dark. FBI, get down, don't move. Inside, the site left agents frozen in place. 14 children, thin, heads shaved, wearing gray uniforms, standing in a line with hollow eyes. Some couldn't remember their own names. One child kept repeating, I was born in the center. I don't have a mom. Elijah was found in the second basement, hands bound, but his eyes unshaken. When the restraints came off, he ran into Marlene's arms, as if sprinting back through memory itself. I knew you never left me. I still hear you in my head, every night. Marlene held him tight. For the first time, her heart stopped hurting, so it could start fighting. The rescue hadn't even settled when the name NovaCare flooded every headline in the country. And just one day later, the woman behind it all was officially exposed. Claudette Roux, former chair of the Louisiana State Welfare Commission, a symbol of compassion, once honored for her work in social welfare, and the very person who had approved legal support for Marlene Rhodes when she was just 27. It was Claudette who had introduced NovaCare to Marlene back then. It was Claudette who assured her that Elijah would be placed in a humane and loving home. When questioned, Claudette appeared on national television, wearing a pristine white blazer, hands folded neatly over her chest. We only wanted to save abandoned children. Not everything you see is the truth. But this time, the public no longer believed words crafted by PR strategists because the truth had been live-streamed from a basement, and the lie had already begun to rock. From the name itself, NovaCare, Claudette Roux's televised defense hadn't even cooled. When the financial evidence burst open like a broken dam, with the help of an anonymous data engineer, Reuben cracked NovaCare's internal fund transfers. The findings, $5 million, transferred from an account labeled Children Outreach Grant, directly into Claudette Roux's personal bank account, over a span of 2 years. But what left Marlene frozen in silent disbelief was the note beneath one particular transaction, dated 3 days after Elijah's first court appearance, Silence Contract, Rhodes Case. Her name, her son's case, tied directly to a stream of cold-blooded money used to buy silence. This was no longer abuse of power. This was the trafficking of children. wrapped in the costume of charity. And the woman who once promised Marlene, "Your child will be protected," now stood fully exposed. A fraud, with blood on her hand and pockets lined with cash. October 7th, the federal courtroom was packed. Media crews lined both hallways. Hundreds of eyes locked on the witness stand. Not a politician, not an official, but an 8-year-old boy, Elijah Rhodes. He stood tall, small hands gripping the edge of the table, eyes fixed on Claudette Roux. Sitting below with arms crossed, cold and silent, the court moderator asked, "Elijah, is there something you'd like to say?" The entire room held its breath. Then he began, not shaking, not angry, just real. "They made me forget my mom, made me write that she was dead, but memories don't die. I remember her walking me in the rain. I remember the smell of her coat, orchid. I know my mom never left me." Silence fell over the courtroom like a black velvet curtain. Then one woman started to cry. Then another. No gavel was needed. No verdict had to be spoken. The truth had been said, and America could no longer pretend it didn't hear it. 3 weeks after the historic trial, Claudette Roux was officially sentenced. Charges: federal child trafficking, defrauding government funds, conspiracy to silence a witness. Sentence: 75 years in prison with no possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, she didn't cry, didn't resist. But the eyes that once gleamed like steel now held nothing but a hollow shadow of too late regret. At the same time, NovaCare was completely dismantled, accounts frozen, licenses revoked, all assets seized to compensate the victims. Over the next 2 months of investigation, the FBI uncovered hundreds of forged records, 79 children, renamed, identity reprogrammed, trained to serve, were reunited with their real families. Many no longer recognized their parents. Some couldn't say their own names. But their eyes slowly began to regain the color of light. The system had collapsed, but hope had started to take root again, planted by children who were once treated as nameless products on paper. After the case that shook the nation, Marlene Rhodes stood before the press and declared, "I'm resigning as a judge, not because I failed in my career, but because I've rediscovered my first role, being a mother." She didn't return to the courtroom. Instead, with Reuben Cross and survivor Autumn by her side, Marlene founded a nonprofit called the Rootline Project. Their mission wasn't charity, it was trace work, decoding, cross-referencing records to uncover the true identities of children who had been renamed, erased, and reprogrammed. Reuben led the data investigations. Autumn, now 11, drew center layouts from memory, blueprints of secret facility, and Marlene spearheaded the legal front, filing lawsuits against every individual and institution that helped bury the truth. Because to them, these children weren't cases in need. They were human beings, with memories, with roots, and a right to know who they truly are. Elijah Rhodes is no longer the child with the forged file. He now lives with his mother in a small house by the river, where mornings smell like coffee and afternoons echo with birdsong in the garden. Every morning before school, Elijah gently places his hand on his mother's shoulder and says, "I want to be a lawyer like you. I want to help kids. Remember who they are, the way you helped me." Marlene doesn't answer. She just bends down and holds him for a long time, because she knows it wasn't the law that saved Elijah. It was memory and a love that never went out. In their backyard, they plant one flower each month, each one named after a child who was reunited with their family through the Rootline Project. One is named Autumn. Some have no names. For those still waiting to be found, justice doesn't live only in a verdict. It lives in memory, in a boy who once stood up and said, "I remember my mom," and in the small hands that are now replanting the roots for a world that once tried to make them forget who they were.